Welcome to Tino's Time, and on this episode, we're going to recap week 4 of the fantasy season, and we're going to preview week 5 and get you ready to set your lineups. And let's not waste any time, and let's get right into the headlines for week 4. Tom Brady, the GOAT, breaks the all-time passing record, passing Drew Brees with 80,560 yards. The GOAT, Brady, is number 1 in passing yards of all time. Is there going to be anyone to ever catch him? Deebo Samuel and Tyreek Hill, have yourself a days, my friends. They both scored 30-plus points, and they probably helped you win your week, and they put you over the top against your opponent. Football in week 5, it finally returns to London. So that means football starts at 8:30 a.m. in the morning. So get excited, everybody, because football starts early this Sunday. So you got to make sure you wake up and set your lineups early if you have anybody on the Falcons. So if you have Calvin Ridley, Matt Ryan, Cordell Patterson that we'll talk about in a little bit, they just went off this week. Jets, we'll talk about the Jets and how they actually look pretty good against the Titans this week. But the Jets and Falcons this Sunday at 8:30 a.m. in London. And before we get into talk about everything that happened on Sunday, let's get into all the injuries that happened this past week. Teddy Bridgewater, he left with a head injury and he got a concussion and he did not return to the game this week. He is in the concussion protocol, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. So if Drew Lock starts this week, watch out because you might want to start Javonte Williams or Melvin Gordon because they might rely on the run a little bit more. Jimmy Garoppolo left with a calf injury, and it looks like he might be out. So Trey Lance, he gets his opportunity. David Montgomery sadly left the Bears game this past Sunday versus the Lions with a knee injury. Everybody feared that it was a torn ACL, but it is not. And he will be out a significant amount of time, 5 to 6 weeks. But it's better than him being out the full year because the Bears definitely need the power running that David Montgomery brings. So we'll talk about a waiver wire pickup. Actually, 2 waiver wire pickups that if you have David Montgomery, there's 2 running backs that you could go pick up for the Chicago Bears if you need a replacement. Also, Joe Mixon hurt his ankle last Thursday night versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he got that extra couple days of rest, so we'll have to see. But he's a guy that you want to keep a monitor on and you want to watch this week, because if he is out, I'll give you the backup in a little bit when we talk about the waiver wire pickups. A.J. Brown and Julio Jones both missed this past Sunday's game with the Titans versus the Jets with hamstring injuries, and it definitely because we saw McMichael from the Tennessee Titans get a lot of catches. He was in the game a lot. Derrick Henry obviously got a touchdown. He was involved a lot, but Ryan Tannehill, he didn't really throw to the receivers as much. We were relying on Nick Westbrook. He didn't do too much, but this is something that you need to keep an eye out because, as you know, hamstrings are not one of those things that you can mess with because they can linger all season. So hopefully they are able to both get on the field this upcoming week because the Titans are definitely going to need them because we saw how bad their offense really moved, and the Jets actually looked pretty good, and the Jets played really good defense, and they literally got their first win, and they played great. It was crazy to watch the Jets versus Titans game. It was ridiculous, but we'll get into that game a little bit later. Also, Rob Gronkowski, he did not make the trip to New England, to Foxborough with the Buccaneers, and he did miss the Sunday night game, even though Tom Brady missed him definitely. We saw in the red zone and stuff like that. Hopefully Gronk will be able to be back because we will miss him, but if not, I'll tell you a tight end that you need to pick up because he had a really good game last week, and he might be involved a lot more in the passing game. So if you have Gronk or if you have any of those injured players, I'll give you guys in a little bit that you can pick up and put in your lineup, because also remember, next week the bye week starts, so we're going to have to start figuring out bye weeks, and that's just what happens in fantasy football. But before we get into all the waiver wire pickups and everything, let's talk about the Monday night game. The Monday night game last night, it was the Los Angeles Chargers versus the Las Vegas Raiders. I can't even believe I'm saying that. I got so used to saying Oakland versus San Diego. But this game was really good. And in the first half, Justin Herbert put on a show. He had 3 touchdowns. He had 175 yards, and I thought he was going to have 6 touchdowns and over 300 or 400 yards. And the Chargers ended up taking a big lead. They ended up taking a 21-7 lead, and they just completely demolished the Raiders to the point where it took until the end of the second half for the Raiders to get going. The Raiders, just Josh Jacobs, he had 40 yards, 5 receptions. He had 17 receiving yards. He only had 10.9 points. And for a running back number 2, that isn't just going to do it. And he was a game-time decision, so that probably had a lot to do with it. But Kenyon Drake or Peyton Barber, they didn't get involved at all. They barely had any points. Peyton Barber had 1 carry. Henry Ruggs, though, he had 3 receptions for 60 yards. He caught a 1 bomb for 51 yards, and that was a big reason on why he was able to get to what he was able to do and put up some points. Hopefully you started him in your flex. And yeah, that's not a lot of points, but hey, on a Monday night, you never know, and those 9 points might have helped you win. Darren Waller, though, on the other hand, he put up 4 receptions. He put up 50 yards receiving and 1 touchdown on Monday night. So if you have Darren Waller, hopefully it helped you win your week this week, because he's a bad man. And hey, if we get a touchdown from Darren every week, I'll take it. For the Chargers side, I know I kind of went to the Raiders real quick, but let's talk about the Chargers now. Justin Herbert, we talked about, he put up 3 touchdowns. He had 222 yards, and he put up 20-plus fantasy points. Austin Eckler, he had 117 yards. He had 2 touchdowns, 3 receptions, and 28 receiving yards. Austin Eckler, my people, my guys, everything in Tino Nation, he might be a number 1 overall pick next year, because Austin Eckler is proving, especially in PPR leagues, that he can put up 20-plus points every single week, and that's what you need in a first-rounder. Mike Williams, though. What happened, my guy? You got 1 catch for 11 yards. I go out and trade for you, and that's what you do to me? Come on, man. I know the Raiders' defense was really good. Their secondary, their cornerbacks did do very good. Keenan Allen had a better game. He didn't have like one of those big games that we were expecting. But right now, I'm not too worried about Mike Williams. If he keeps this up for another few weeks, we're going to get back to that. But a guy that Justin Herbert seemed to be going to a lot more than Mike Williams was Jared Cook. Jared Cook had 6 receptions for 70 yards and 1 touchdown. And if you need a tight end, I would definitely consider going to pick up Jared Cook. Jared Cook, maybe if you started him, maybe if you did, maybe not. You know, hopefully if you were one of those people, I saw somebody in one of my leagues that they did start him, so good for you. But now that we talked about the Monday night game, let's talk about, even though we had Jared Cook and Justin Herbert and Austin Eckler helping you win, let's talk about guys that were just straight up disappointments, and they didn't help you win your week. And I'm sorry if you had these guys. You probably lost, and honestly, some of these guys you can drop, and there's a couple guys on this list that you might need to be able to sit this week because they're just not producing the way that we thought that they were and the way that we expected them to. Tyson Williams, though, he was a healthy scratch, and he was a waiver wire pickup a few weeks ago that I told everybody to go out and get, but he was just awful, and he didn't even play this week. And Latavius Murray and Devontae Freeman and Le'Veon Bell got more carries. They have a 3-headed monster from 2016. This is 6 years later, 5 years later, people. Let's not go back to 2016. Hopefully Tyson Williams can get back in the progress and in the flow with that offense. But honestly, right now, I would just drop him. Tony Pollard had 6.7 points, and it seems like Zeke the Freak is back. Feed him. He's going to be feeding the rest of the year. So honestly, I would put Tony Pollard on your bench, and honestly, I wouldn't even start him until Zeke gets hurt, or I just can't trust him right now. Another guy I really cannot trust is Miles Sanders. Kenneth Gainwell seemed to get a lot more carries, and he even got a touchdown this week, and Miles Sanders only put up 7.7 points, and that just ain't going to do it, especially for a guy that we were counting on being our running back 2, or even a guy maybe a running back 1, depending on where you drafted in the draft. Another running back that had just an awful week, and to be honest, I don't even know what to do with this guy. It's Myles Gaskin. Myles Gaskin from the Dolphins had 0.3 points. That's 3 yards, people. That's not even a full point. That ain't even going to do nothing for us. What is that going to do? Hope that we win by 0.3? No. That's not going to do. So honestly, I'm over the Myles Gaskin. I traded him in one of my leagues. I'm kind of happy I did because now he had a really bad week and I was able to get him off my hands. But Myles Gaskin is somebody I just cannot trust anymore, and there's just better options, and we'll talk about guys in a little bit that I think that you can trust, and there's backups that you could start over Gaskin. Speaking of the guy that I traded away for Gaskin for, I actually traded away James Robinson, Myles Gaskin, and Devontae Smith for Jamal Chase, Mike Williams, and this guy, Deandre Swift. Deandre Swift is supposed to be this PPR machine. He's supposed to catch everything. He's supposed to be Jared Goff's check down animal, and this man puts up 8.9 points. Come on. I trade for you. I think it's just me. I think I'm just straight up bad luck for these people. It's just me, people. I think it just, whoever I tell you to start, they do the opposite. Whoever I tell you to sit, they do the, I don't know. But it just seems like it's me and DeAndre Swift. The Bears defense showed up and showed why they're the monsters of the midway. And maybe it was just a bad game plan. And yes, DeAndre Swift, we did not practice. And yes, he's been kind of hurt up and down all week. But I was expecting a lot more, especially after Dan Campbell came out and said that they were going to use him a lot more. And it was just a straight up disappointment. Two wide receivers that were straight up disappointments were Tyler Lockett, had 6.2 points, and yes, Tyler Lockett does this all the time. He has a few big weeks, and then he has a few bad weeks, and a few big good weeks, and he goes back and forth, so I'm not going to worry too much about Tyler Lockett. What are you going to do, sit him? Because Russell is still looking his way, and we're going to talk about Seattle and Russell in a little bit, and I'm going to give you a bold prediction, not even like a bold prediction, but we'll get into that a little bit later. I don't want to ruin it, so let's not talk about that just yet. Another wide receiver that had a really bad week was CeeDee Lamb. He had 3.3 points. He just did not get going at all. And it's one of those things, he's another guy I'm not going to worry too much about because Dak is always going to have to throw the ball, and the Cowboys are always going to be down, and their offense is always going to be deadly, and they're always going to score a lot of points. So CD has better days to come. Allen Robinson, though, had 9.3 points, and if he would have got a touchdown and had a couple more catches, he would have had double-digit points, and I'm not mad about it. And I wouldn't worry too much about Allen Robinson. Darryl Mooney was the one that benefited a lot from Justin Fields' deep balls. Oh my God, that deep ball was incredible to watch. But Allen Robinson is another guy. I'm just not too worried too much about these wide receivers because I don't, there's a lot of wide receivers that you could go and trust, but these are three of the top on their teams, and you don't want to sit them because you don't want to make a bad move and then one of these guys go off and you're going to be like, dang, I should have started them. But let's talk about two tight ends that I am worried about because I just said I'm not worried about these receivers, but these tight ends. George Kittle had 8 points. And Jimmy G, we talked about it just in the injuries. He left with a calf injury. And George Kittle only got all of his catches with Jimmy G in the game. When Trey Lance came in the game and that offense ran in the second half, he wasn't really looking George Kittle's way. And George Kittle, yes, he did come in with an injury and he was kind of like questionable and he was this and that. But as a number 2, 3 tight end that we drafted and we were hoping to be the top 3 with Travis Kelce and Darren Waller and maybe even Mark Andrews, he's just not putting up the numbers. And to be honest, I don't know if I could trust George Kittle. I don't know if I can, especially with Trey Lance. It looks like he's going to be starting for a few weeks, and maybe I could be wrong. I'm not telling you to sit him. I might be in a little bit. We'll have to find out. But, I just don't know if I can trust George Kittle right now. Robert Tonyan, I have him in one of my leagues. I actually have him in 2 of my leagues. He had 2.8 points. He had 2 catches for 8 yards. And it's just not going to do after that deep offense and that hoping they were going to score all these points and Robert Tonyan was going to get all these red zone touchdowns. It's just not happening, and he's just not looking his way. He's looking more Randall Cobb's way. Obviously, Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones. They've been using a lot of A.J. Dillon. They've been doing all this and that. So it's one of those things that I might tell you to go find a different tight end, and I'm going to try to find a different tight end. I have the guy from Arizona, Max Williams. If you didn't go pick him up yet, he's another guy. If you need tight end help, I would definitely go and pick him up because he did have another touchdown this past week. He actually put up 17 points. So I would maybe go pick up Williams if you can, but Tonyan is just somebody that I cannot trust right now, and I don't know. I'm kind of worried. I might have to start him this week in one of my leagues, but I'm really freaking out because it's one of those things I just don't want to have to do because I did draft him so high and I thought he was going to be a good tight end, but it just hasn't worked out. But enough about all the guys that got us disappointed. Let's talk about all the the guys that helped you win your week. And I went 3-0 this week in my 3 leagues. Hopefully you did the same no matter what leagues you're in or how many leagues you're in. If you're in 1, 2, 3, 7, 15, whatever you're in, hopefully you went undefeated. But if you had these guys, they probably helped you win, or they definitely helped you get ahead and put you over your opponent. And let's start off. I mentioned these 2 in the headlines. Tyreek Hill had 11 receptions, 186 yards, 3 touchdowns, and put up 47.6 points. There was a guy, he drafted him first overall, and for some reason he sat Tyreek Hill because he had a bad week last week. You want to give me Tyreek Hill? I'll play him and not sit him on my bench. He put up 47.6 points, and he just had himself a day. Speaking of a guy that had himself a day, Deebo Samuel. We talked about George Kittle. It didn't matter who the quarterback was for Deebo. He had 8 receptions, 156 yards, 2 touchdowns, and had 35.7 points. Cordell Patterson, though, people. Cordell Patterson was on the New England Patriots. He was on the Chicago Bears last year. And I think Matt Ryan found his new favorite toy. He had 34 yards. He had 5 receptions for 82 receiving yards. But he had 3 total touchdowns. He was stealing touchdowns from Calvin Ridley, Kyle Pitts. You know, Cordell Patterson is one of those guys that has always been used and always been really beneficial and really good at what he's been doing and what he's been used at, but he's never been to this capable and this putting up this many fantasy points. So I'm telling you, people, you might be able to put Patterson in your lineup and feel good, especially as a flex or maybe even an RB2, because if he puts up 34.6 points, that's phenomenal from a guy that you just pick up off the waiver wire. I'll call that a fantasy waiver wire wonder all day long. But let's talk about 2 receivers that had themselves a day, and they're just proving out why they're number 1 receivers. DJ Moore had 8 receptions, 113 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 31.9 points. Scary Terry McLaurin, he had 6 receptions for 123 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 30.3 points. Saquon Barkley, welcome back to fantasy football. Saquon Barkley, I mentioned it last week. He was going to have himself a game. He did have himself a game, and now he did it 2 weeks in a row. He put up 52 yards, 5 receptions, 74 receiving yards, but he had 2 total touchdowns, and he put up 29.6 points. So if you're able to snag Saquon Barkley later in the draft, or somebody made him fall into the second round, you're definitely benefiting a lot from Saquon being the guy that we saw a few years ago before his horrible injury. Let's talk about Jalen Hurts, though. Jalen Hurts had himself a day, too. He put up 387 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 47 rushing yards. Jalen Hurts put up a lot of good numbers, and that Chiefs defense just continues to prove that you can start everybody against him. So again, this week they get to face the Bills. I would start all your Bills against that Chiefs defense, because if the Philadelphia Eagles and Devontae Smith can put up 19.2 points, Kenneth Gainwell can get a touchdown, imagine what Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley and Dawson Knox are going to do to that defense. It's going to be awesome, and we might even see an upset, and the Chiefs might fall to 2-3. But speaking of a quarterback, I'm happy for this man, and I'm even more happy because I got him in one of my leagues. Sam Darnold, my man. You had 301 yards, 4 total touchdowns. He did throw 2 interceptions, but he had 43.56 points. In other leagues, he had like 38 points, depending on how your scoring is. But Sam Darnold is a fantasy quarterback that you can start every single week now. Another quarterback, he was on my bench, and he's actually my backup. Matt Ryan put up right around the same numbers as Sam Darnold. He had 283 yards. He had 4 touchdowns, but he didn't throw any interceptions. And the only reason why Sam Darnold has an extra point is because he ran in 2 touchdowns, and Matt Ryan threw all 4 of his touchdowns. Matt Ryan finished with 42.68 points, and maybe Matt Ryan is back to fantasy football relevancy. He has bad weeks. He has up and down weeks. He has good weeks. He throws the ball up and down. Maybe you could feed the ball more to Calvin Ridley just a little bit. Please get this man a touchdown. I feel like I'm watching Julio Jones out there. Now you're just giving Cordell all the touchdowns and not Ridley like you did with Julio and Ridley. Just makes no sense. But speaking of a guy, welcome back to fantasy football. And this is a little bit of a humble brag. Jonathan Taylor scored his first touchdowns touchdown this week, and he did his thing and he put up 103 yards and 1 touchdown. And yeah, he didn't get too many points. He put up 20.4 points in case anybody didn't hear me. He put up really good numbers, and he is finally, hopefully this game is a game he can move momentum on and he can continue to put up 20 plus points, because that's what we need from him, especially because we drafted him in the first or second round, depending on where you were drafting. We just welcome back JT, and we need you in fantasy football. But now that we talked about the studs of the week and we had a little bit of fun and your boy did a little bit of a humble brag, it's time for us to do my bad and humble brag. While we're doing a little bit of a humble brag, let's continue on this. Last week, I have Cordell in one of my leagues, and I didn't start him because like I mentioned earlier, I traded for Deandre Swift and I thought he was going to have catches all day long. But in my podcast last week, I told you to stream Cordell Patterson if you didn't have any other better options. I thought Swift was a better option, but Cordell Patterson put up 34.6 points like we just mentioned in the studs on Sunday. Cordell Patterson put up huge numbers, and he just did his thing. So he's a guy that you can trust, and I would definitely put him in your lineup versus that Jets defense, even though they did play very well last week. Ryan Tannehill didn't have his two receivers, but now that Matt Ryan, Calvin Ridley, Kyle Pitts, all these guys, Cordell Patterson, are going to go out to London and play the Jets, I think that the Jets are going to have a lot more in their hands, because the Jets, yeah, they played great, but they're still the Jets. Dawson Knox got a touchdown, and Dawson Knox is a guy that if you have not already, go pick him up and start him, because he's proving that he is touchdown, and you can get a touchdown once a week. And for tight ends at this point, that's what we need, especially if you have a George Kittle or Robert Tonyan. If you were able to get a Dawson Knox, I was not able to in one of my leagues, so I got to figure that out. But if you started Dawson Knox and Cordell Patterson, I told you last week, and I just needed to do a little bit of a humble brag. But now, let's do a little bit of a my bad, because there were some things last week I told you to do, and it just did not work out. I told you to start in Titans defense. In some leagues, they got 7 points. In other leagues, they only got 2 points. And it's one of those things. I thought the Jets were going to throw a lot of interceptions, but Zach Wilson seemed to get going in the second half, and he seemed to do a lot better than we thought he would do. And it's just one of those things that, so I'm sorry I told you to start the Titans. I started the Titans in 2 of my leagues. It didn't work out for me. I got lucky that other people didn't start great defenses. But I'm sorry if you listen to me about the Titans. Last week I told you Deandre Swift was going to go off and he was going to have all these big games and he was going to do this and that. He was going to be a catching machine. But he did not, and he only had 8.9 points. So I'm sorry if you started DeAndre Swift, just like I traded for him and started him. What are we going to do? Sit DeAndre? I'm sure he's going to have a better matchup this upcoming week, and hopefully that the Lions are down and he'll be a catching machine, and he can make up for all those points that he left out on the field versus the Chicago Bears. I'm sorry I told you to sit Henry Ruggs, and he didn't have a big game, but he had about 9 points, and, that's not I told you to start him, and he didn't have a great game, and I'm sorry. So I think I actually said sit. I told you to start him because I thought he was going to have a good game on Monday night, but he didn't. He only had, like I said, about 9 points. Devontae Smith, though, I told you to sit Devontae Smith, and this man puts up 19.2 points. I mentioned earlier DeAndre Swift I traded for. This is another guy I traded, and he goes off. I think it's just me. But hopefully you didn't listen to me, and DeAndre Swift was one guy, or not DeAndre Swift, Devontae Smith from the Philadelphia Eagles was a guy that you started in your flex and you didn't listen to me, and hopefully those 19.2 points helped you win your week and moved on to 3-1. Maybe you got your first win, maybe you went to 500, whatever it is. So hopefully all those things didn't cost you. Hopefully you listened to me on those 2 things, and hopefully you didn't listen to me on the things that were my bad. So I'm sorry, but enough about humble brag and giving myself a little bit of credit, and let's not talk about my bads. Let's talk about the 3 things that I learned from week 4 before we get into week 5, and we talk about everything that's going to go on, and we got to get you ready to set your lineup. So maybe you got to go to 5-0, 4-1, whatever your record may be. But the 3 things I learned: George Kittle may not be an elite tight end anymore. We talked about it a little bit earlier in the disappointments. He just was not what we thought he was going to be. And especially if Jimmy Garoppolo, I almost said Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham's not a quarterback. Jimmy Garoppolo is out this upcoming week with Trey Lance. Like we talked about, he didn't get very many catches and he didn't get very many targets. So maybe George Kittle is not a start like we think. So maybe he is somebody that we got to stream or think about. I don't know. I'll give you a tight end that maybe you can go out and get. And I'm not telling you to sit George Kittle, but I don't know if I can trust him this week. So the other thing I learned was Zach Wilson can play football. True. I didn't know he didn't know how to not throw interceptions. This week we just talked about it with the Titans defense. Zach Wilson went out and showed in the second half that he can play football. And he threw a touchdown to Corey Davis. Corey Davis is a machine. And Zach Wilson and Corey Davis just have this type of connection. So, Zach Wilson, welcome to the NFL. We'll have to see how you do in London this week versus the Falcons. Austin Eckler, though, I talked about him on Monday night when we talked about the Monday night game. Austin Eckler might be a number one pick next year. This man is putting up 20-plus points. He's getting touchdowns every week. He gets the ball checked down to him. He is literally doing everything, and they're using the same type of plays that Alvin Kamara used, and it looks like the Saints offense that Drew Brees ran about like 2 or 3 years ago where they were just completely deadly, and that's what Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, and Mike Williams, even though he had a bad game, Keenan Allen, Jared Cook, that's what they're all doing up in Los Angeles, and it looks deadly. So the last thing that I learned from week 4 is the next year you might have to think about taking Austin Eckler number 1. But now that we have recapped week 4, let's get into week 5 and let's start and previewing everything to get your lineup set and to make sure that we can stay ahead of our competitors and we can win and keep our run going and we can bring it all the way to the playoffs because like if you don't know, baseball playoffs start this week, so get excited. But this isn't about baseball. So let's get into week 5 of the fantasy football season. Let's get started the same way we always do for the next week on Tino's time. Let's start off with my bold predictions. And we saw Josh Allen and the Bills destroy the Houston Texans last week. So I'm going to say Mac Jones is going to have a breakout game, and this man's going to throw for 5 touchdowns versus that awful Texans defense. So make sure you start all your New England Patriots this week. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to come out and have 3 touchdowns this week. The Buccaneers defense are going to come out and intercept the ball 3 times and go out and return it for a touchdown. They're going to intercept Jacoby Brissett a bunch of times, and we're going to feel good starting their defense. The Jets and the Falcons are going to combine for 80 total points. Last week, we saw the Jets compete, and we saw the Jets show up versus the Tennessee Titans. So we always see crazy games in London. We've seen the Jaguars go undefeated. Blake Bortles, for some reason, all those years that the Jaguars went to London, he went off and he just had games left and right. So the the Jets and Falcons are going to combine for 80 total points. So that might be a game that's going to be fantasy gold, and you need to start all the players. Those are my 3 bold predictions for week 5. Now, let's get into my top 5 waiver wire pickups for week 5 and my top 5 flex options for week 5. And number 5 for my waiver wire pickups, go pick up Zach Moss. We saw David Montgomery, we saw Joe Mixon. We've seen so many guys get injured throughout the season for the running backs already. So if you need a running back, Zach Moss scored another touchdown and he put up double-digit points and he got a touchdown. So go pick him up. Speaking of Joe Mixon, my number 4 waiver wire pickup is Samaje Perine from the Cincinnati Bengals. He is the backup for the Cincinnati Bengals to Joe Mixon. So if you have Joe Mixon, go pick him up and feel good about starting him this week because he is a really good matchup and, he's going to get the same work that Joe Mixon is going to get. So go pick up Perine. Number 3, Dawson Knox. Dawson Knox for the Buffalo Bills for some reason just continuously scores touchdowns and takes them away for Stephon Diggs. Emmanuel Sanders is getting involved, and that whole Buffalo Bills offense is getting involved. So if you need a tight end, we've talked a lot about George Kittle struggling. We've talked about Robert Tonyan. If Dawson Knox is still on the waiver wire, go pick him up and start him and feel good about it. Number 2 waiver wire pickup option this week, Jamison Crowder. Jamison Crowder is back in fantasy football. We saw him make his debut this week versus the Titans, and we saw Corey Davis put up good numbers and get a big touchdown, but we also saw Jamison Crowder score 15.60 points, and he came out and he scored a lot of points. And if you need a wide receiver, the buys are coming up. Definitely go consider picking up Crowder, because we are going to need players for bye weeks next week, week 6, bye week start. So if you need a wide receiver to start, if you have a struggling receiver that you don't trust, go pick up Crowder and feel good about it. My number 1 waiver wire pickup, though, this week is Damian Williams or Khalil Herbert. David Montgomery, we talked about it in the injuries a little bit earlier, that he is going to be out for 5 to 6 weeks with a significant knee injury. Thank God he is not out for the season and did not tear his ACL. But right now we're gonna need somebody to replace Montgomery, because we probably drafted him pretty high as an RB2. So Damian Williams or Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert is a deep sleeper that if you have David Montgomery, go and pick these guys up, because unless you could go get somebody that is, like I said, Zach Moss hopefully is still on the waiver wire, go get him. But because David Montgomery is out, it's always good to have the backup. And Williams, if he plays this week, he is injured, so hopefully he does play. But whoever does play for the Bears running backs, we saw Williams have a few good runs this week versus the Lions, and yes, it's versus the Lions, but they get to go out and play the Raiders, and we saw what Austin Eckler did. And obviously not, these guys aren't Austin Eckler, but they're still going to get the volume and the same play and the same amount of snaps that David Montgomery you get. So go pick up Damian Williams. Yes, that Damian Williams that was on the Chiefs. If you're wondering, yes, that Damian Williams that was on the Chiefs for the Super Bowl run. But now that I gave you my top 5 waiver wire pickups, now let's talk about my top 5 flex options for week 5. At number 5 for my flex options, go pick up Darnell Mooney. I told you last week to pick him up. I told you to flex him last week, and hopefully you did. He had a huge game last week versus the Lions. So Darnell Mooney, go put him in your flex if you need some flex help, because he gets to go play the Vegas Raiders this week. And yes, they did very good on stopping Mike Williams and stuff like that. But Darnell Mooney proved that he can get into space and make a deep pass, and all he honestly needs is one deep catch. Speaking of deep catches, though, Van Jefferson is another one. He has had a few games this season that he's had a lot of good production, and in a couple games that he hasn't had good. But last week, getting another touchdown, and now they get to go face the Seattle Seahawks, and the Seattle Seahawks run defense hasn't been very good, and their defense in general just has not been as good as we all expected. So go pick up Van Jefferson if you haven't already, and feel good putting him in your flex, because that Rams offense moves a lot better than I thought they would. Now, for my third flex option for the week, it's Hunter Renfro versus the Chicago Bears. Hunter Renfro caught another touchdown on Monday night, and he did his thing, and he seems like he's getting involved, and Derek Carr just for some reason is looking his way. So go put him in the flex option versus the Chicago Bears. As much as I love my Chicago Bears, their secondary just isn't as good, and they're, other than Jalen Johnson as their cornerbacks, they don't really have like Kendall, Vindor, and stuff like that. I'm just worried that Darren Waller might get a lot of separation. We'll have to see. But if you need a flex option, go start Hunter Renfro. My number 2 flex option for the week, it's Antonio Brown versus the Miami Dolphins. We talked about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and my bold predictions about getting 3 defensive touchdowns. And Antonio Brown last week caught a lot of good passes, and he did his thing, and he showed that he might be the guy that we saw on the Steelers. And he's never really not shown it. He's just had a few games that he's been up and down, and he's so inconsistent now. But he's proven that, you could definitely put him in your flex and trust him, especially versus Miami. I think the Buccaneers and Brady are just going to go off. And, yes, they did win versus the Patriots this past week, but the Patriots did put up a really good fight. And so, yeah, but they're going to continue their run. So start Antonio Brown this week. My number one flex option, I told you to pick him up last week. I told you to start him last week. I didn't listen to myself. I did not start him in one of my leagues. But Cordell Patterson versus the Jets. This guy has went off and consistently put up 10 to 20 plus points the last 2 to 3 weeks of the season. He's putting up consistent numbers, and he seems like he's the running back over Mike Davis. And if that is the case and Cordell Patterson continues to get the same volume and work that he's going to put up 20 plus points every single week, and that is a guy that we did not expect. Matt Ryan's new favorite, Tory. Go pick up Cordell Patterson if you haven't already. Go snag him up. Maybe even go try trade for him if you can. Maybe try. You might have to spend a little bit, but he might be that guy this season that we can trust all season long on the Falcons. So Cordell Patterson is my number one flex option for week 5. Now, let's get into the best thing of the week for every single Sunday, every single fantasy football week. It's the starts, sits, and streams of week 5 in every single week of the season. But let's start off with the starts. My start of the week at quarterback for week 5 is Kirk Cousins versus the Lions. We saw what Justin Fields did last week. He put up a lot of really good numbers last week, and Kirk Cousins has a lot better options than Justin Fields does, and he has Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook, Alexander Madison. I think Kirk Cousins is going to feast. We saw what Aaron Rodgers did versus the Lions. The Lions are 0-4. They're probably going to go 0-5. So start Kirk Cousins. I just talked about Cordell Patterson. Start Matt Ryan versus the Jets, and also start Cordell. I put him in your flex. Start him this week. I told you to start him. I told you to just put Cordell in your lineup. He's going to do his thing versus the Jets. Matt Ryan is going to do his thing. Everybody on the Falcons are going to do their thing this week. So start Matt Ryan and Cordell Patterson. He is my first running back to start this week, by the way, if you didn't catch that. My second running back for the week to start this week is Latavius Murray versus the Colts. Latavius Murray has been the guy that seems like he's getting a lot of the work, and yes, it seems like they got a 3-headed monster in the Ravens, but right now, Latavius Murray is the one guy that I feel like I can trust. So versus the Colts, if you need a running back, start him this week. My 2 receivers that you need to start, Cole Beasley versus the Chiefs. We've talked about that Chiefs defense. That Chiefs defense is awful, and I think Cole Beasley is going to have a lot of catches, and he's going to have a lot of volume, and that's all you need, especially in PPR leagues. Cole Beasley is a PPR machine, so start him versus the Chiefs. Also, start Latavius Schultz Jr. versus the Titans. We saw what the Titans gave up to Corey Davis, what they gave up to Jamison Carter last week, and I think the Jaguars are going to compete. And, I don't know how well the Jaguars are going to do like the Jets did last week, but I think that the Jets are going to be able to compete, and if the Jaguars do get a few touchdowns, I think Schultz Jr. is going to be that guy. So start him this week versus the Titans. The 2 tight ends I'm going to tell you to start is 2 tight ends that we weren't even talking about in a couple weeks ago. It's CJ Uzomah. You're saying CJ Uzomah? You mean that guy on the Bengals for like a few years ago? And yes, him. Last Thursday night versus the Jaguars, this man caught 2 touchdowns, and Joe Burrow seems to have a really good connection with these guys. So if you need a tight end, we're going to talk about George Kittle in a minute. Just if you have guys that are struggling like Robert Tonyan and you need a tight end, go pick up CJ and start him this week versus the Packers. Jared Cook, phenomenal game on Monday night. Keep him in your lineup. He's going to have a great game versus the Browns, and just feel good because for some reason Justin Herbert likes him, and that's fine with me. The defense I'm going to tell you to start this week, it's the Patriots versus the Texans. I talked about it in my bold predictions about what I think Mac Jones is going to do. I think the Patriots are going to do the exact same thing that the Bills did to them. The Houston Texans are just a disaster, so if you need a defense this week, the Patriots are the defense to pick up and start this week. But now that we've talked about all the starts for the week, what guys are we going to sit? And then we're going to get into what guys we can stream for the guys that we can sit. So my sits of the week at quarterback is Carson Wentz versus the Ravens. That Ravens defense is just really good. We saw Teddy Bridgewater get hurt. We saw them just not be able to do anything. So don't start Carson Wentz this week. Russell Wilson. And everybody's saying, why am I going to sit Russell Wilson? Russell Wilson, for some reason, versus the Rams, just cannot play football. He has always struggled, and it's just that team that he seems to not always play good against. So I don't think it's going to be, I don't think that it's going to stop. I think the Rams are going to continue what they're doing versus Russ. I'm not saying that he's not going to have a good game. I'm just saying don't expect 35, 40 points. Maybe expect like 15 to 20, and that's not bad for a quarterback. But for dangerous Russ, that's not the numbers we're used to. So if you have a better option, if you have a Matt Ryan maybe versus the Jets, if you have somebody else that you just feel more comfortable, I would definitely consider starting them over Russ, dangerous Russ. Not every week we're going to see dangerous Russ on the sit list. Myles Gaskin and Chris Carson are the two running backs I'm going to tell you to sit. Myles Gaskin versus the Bucks. Myles Gaskin at 0.3 points, and I just think the Buccaneers are going to come out and ball versus the Miami offense, defense. It's just going to be a bloodbath for Miami this week, so stay away from Myles Gaskin. Chris Carson, he's back at it again. Hopefully he's not hurt. You know, we've seen him get injured throughout the seasons, and we saw a lot of Alex Collins on Sunday. And hopefully, you know, Chris Carson stays in the game and he comes out and does his thing this week. But like I talked about with Russ, I just don't know how well the Seattle Seahawks are going to do. And I think that the Rams could very well upset the Seahawks, and the Rams could come out and Matthew Stafford might be like, hey, I'm here to stay. But I just stay away from Chris Carson. The two wide receivers I'm going to tell you to sit, Randall Cobb versus the Bengals and Odell Beckham versus the Chargers. I am telling you Randall Cobb, everybody. Yes, Randall Cobb has went out and had a couple good touchdowns, but I just want to see it one more week. I'm not telling you to drop him, keep him on your bench, but I need one more week to see it consistently to be able to feel comfortable sitting him in my lineup or starting him in my lineup, just because for the simple fact that Rodgers has so many mouths to feed that, you know, we've seen Robert Tonyan struggle, we've seen other guys struggle, but we've seen like Randall Cobb come back out of nowhere. So I just want to see it one more week. So this week I definitely want to sit him versus the Bengals because, you know, we did see Schultz have a really good week last week versus the Bengals. But I want to stay away from Cobb. Now, Odell Beckham. Odell Beckham did booty last week. He just got nothing going. He couldn't catch the ball. And versus the Chargers, we saw what the Chargers did. They gave up one huge catch to Henry Ruggs. Braylon Edwards didn't really do too much. Darren Waller had a touchdown, but the Chargers defense is really good. So I would not start Odell this week, and there are so many other wide receivers that you can start. My two tight ends that you can sit now, I know I said it earlier that I wasn't going to say to ever sit George Kittle, but I'm going to tell you to sit George Kittle this week. George Kittle has just not been what he was, and we've talked about Jimmy G getting hurt and having the calf injury, and it looks like he's going to miss a few weeks. And I'm not saying that George Kittle is going to have a great, awful week. He's not going to, I'm not saying that, and I can't even believe I'm saying this. But if you have better options out there, I would definitely consider George Kittle to sit just because he's been hurt. We don't know what he's going to do with Trey Lance. We just don't know what's going to go on. So I'm going to sit George Kittle this week. I just can't even believe I'm saying this. But Jack Doyle versus the Ravens, I talked about Carson Wentz. Don't start Jack Doyle. Honestly, the only person I'm trusting versus the Ravens is Jonathan Taylor. We saw Jonathan Taylor come back, humble brag. He came back and he did his thing. This past week, he got his first touchdown. Like I said last week on my show, I said Jonathan Taylor was going to get his first touchdown, and he did. So, a little bit of a humble brag. Now, for the defense, I'm going to sit. I'm going to sit the Falcons because I always pick on the Jets. I always tell you to start the defense that plays the Jets. But Zach Wilson looked like a quarterback last week, and like I said in my bold predictions, those games in London could be crazy, and this one might just be one of the most craziest of them all. And we might just see 80 combined total points scored, and that would be an absolute fantasy bonanza. So stay away from the Falcons defense this week. There's just better defenses. But I'm telling you to sit Dangerous Russ. I'm telling you to sit all these guys. So who are we going to start in place of these guys and feel comfortable starting? My first quarterback that you can stream this week, we just talked about the Patriots defense to start Mac Jones. We saw what Josh Allen did versus the Texans defense, and this is going to be Mac Jones's breakout game. Bold predictions, I said 5 touchdowns. So put him, if you need a quarterback help, if you have Dangerous Russ, I would definitely consider starting Mac Jones over him this week. Now, Sam Darnold, my man. We talked about him in the Studs of Sunday, top performances, guys that helped you win your week. He went out and put on a complete show this week. He had 2 rushing touchdowns, 2 passing touchdowns, and the Panthers versus the Eagles is going to be an absolute game of gold this week. I hope it is. We saw the Eagles defense give up a lot of points this week to the Chiefs, and yes, it's the Chiefs, but Sam Darnold looks good on the Panthers. So start Sam Darnold if you need a quarterback and if you have Dangerous Russ. 2 running backs I'm going to tell you to stream. J.D. McKissick, he's a PPR machine, and we see him get involved a lot. So if you need a running back as a flex, an RB2, in PPR especially, start him. Or stream him this week. Simeon Pierce, we just talked about him in the waiver wire pickups. Go start him versus the Packers, especially if Joe Mixon is out. Hunter Renfro, I told you to start him in the top 5 flex options. Go start him. Go stream him. Feel good about it. Versus the Bears. Hopefully the Bears stop him as a Bears fan. But I just have a feeling that, he's going to have a really good game. Emmanuel Sanders is a guy, we talked about it, like with the Chiefs and Bills. That game's going to be absolute crazy. Points are going to be scored left and right. Hopefully we see 80 to 90 points scored. Maybe that will be the game that gets 80 points like I just mentioned. So start Emmanuel Sanders, and also in that game, stream Dawson Knox. I told you to pick him up in my top 5 waiver wire pickups. Go pick him up if you haven't already and feel good about starting him. This is another one, a stream. I told you to stream Mac Jones. Start the Patriots defense. I'm just picking on the Titans defense this week. Start Hunter Henry. We saw him get a touchdown. We saw Jonnu Smith get a touchdown. We saw Jacoby Myers put up 17.2 points. Go put up and feel good about starting Hunter Henry. And maybe Mac Jones finally found the tight end that he can trust. The streaming defense of the week, though, everybody's going to be kind of confused about it. And this is just because of what happened last week, and I only feel like it's going to happen again. It's the Vikings versus the Lions. We saw the Chicago Bears come out and absolutely feast versus Jared Goff and the Lions. They had 3 stops in the red zone, 3 turnovers, and the defense just ate. Roquan had a sack. Khalil Mack got involved. Robert Quinn, welcome back to the NFL. I think you missed the 2020 season. I don't know where you were last year, but thanks for coming back finally. So start the Vikings this week versus the Lions, because I think Jared Goff might have a few interceptions and maybe he'll have a couple turnovers, and you never know. I talked about it a little bit earlier. I think the Vikings are going to be up, so hopefully Deandre Swift can get a lot of receptions in this game, because I don't know how many points the Lions are really going to score, and that's just what I am hoping on. But now that we've talked about all the starts, sits, and streams, let's talk about the games that are going to be absolute fantasy gold and fantasy bonanza. Like I just mentioned, I talked about the Bills and Chiefs. I talked about how the Jets and Falcons can be good. I also think the Eagles and Panthers, I just mentioned it. The Eagles defense is awful. I think that the Panthers, defense hasn't been, they've been good and they've been up and down, but I think this game is going to be absolute fantasy gold. So I would start Jalen Hurts, Kenneth Gainwell, Devontae Smith, every single buddy, Sam Darnold, Chuba Hubbard. Oh my God. Chuba Hubbard was somebody that was another disappointment. He didn't have a phenomenal week, but I would consider starting him. Definitely start DJ Moore. Feel good about it. Maybe even as a deep sleeper in that game, Terrence Marshall Jr. Maybe he'll get his first touchdown this week. I also mentioned the Bills and Chiefs, and those are my 2 games that are absolute fantasy gold, and that you need to start everybody in those games. And now, the last thing we're going to do before your boy signs off for the week and we say adios until next week, we're going to do the 3 guarantees for week 5. My first guarantee is the Rams and Seahawks is going to be low scoring. We talked about it with Dangerous Russ. I'm sitting Dangerous Russ this week. Russell Wilson, he always struggles versus the Rams, and it's just that thing. Maybe the Rams are his kryptonite, and that's just what it is with Russell Wilson. So I think the Rams and Seahawks are going to be really low scoring, and I just feel like, you're going to obviously start these guys. Just don't expect high points. Henry is going to have at least 2 touchdowns versus the Jaguars. Derrick Henry, we've seen him come out. He's done his thing. He's been a beast. He's come out. He scored 47.7 points in week 2. He came out and balled out. And I think Derrick Henry is going to have 2 touchdowns this week versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. So feel good. Obviously, we're going to start the big man, King Henry. Just feel good that he's going to get 2 touchdowns. Also, the Patriots are at least going to have 1 pick six. I said in my bold predictions the Buccaneers are going to have 3 touchdowns. I also think the Patriots are going to guarantee at least 1 pick six versus the Houston Texans, and that's why they're my start of the week for week 5. I think they're going to pick off Davis Mills, and they're just going to pick them off and run to the end zone and feel good, and we're all going to be celebrating. Hell yeah. And we're going to do a little bit of a humble brag next week on the show, and we're going to be like, yeah, the Patriots got that interception for the touchdown. Woohoo. But those are my 3 guarantees for week 5. And there you have it. I've given you all the information that happened in week 4. I got you ready to set your lineups for week 5. I hope all this information helps. Remember to make sure that you smash that subscribe button. Hit the like button. Go follow me at TinoTime1996 on Twitter. TinoTime10 on Instagram. Tino's Time Wrestling for all you wrestling freaks out there. Tino's Time Wrestling on Instagram, Tino's Time on Facebook, Tino's Time Wrestling on Facebook, and go follow all of my social medias. All of the links are in the comment below and in the description, so make sure that you go do that and help your boy Tino out. I hope everybody is doing good in their fantasy leagues. I hope all this information is helping. Like me, I went 3-0. I am 9-3 in all of my leagues. Let me know what you are. Let me know what some of the disappointments. Let me know what you've done. Maybe you sat Cordell Patterson like I did last week. Maybe you've made some mistakes. Let me know. Let me know how you're feeling. Let me know what you want to know. If you have any questions, I'm always there to answer and help you out. So this fantasy football season is into high gear. We got the MLB playoffs starting tonight. We see the Yankees and Red Sox. So go check out MLB Preview live on YouTube now and just do everything and help your boy Tino out. So until next week, when we recap week 5 and we get ready for week 6 of the fantasy football season. I can't even believe how fast this season is going. We're a month in. It's already October. Halloween is around the corner. But until next week, when we do everything and we talk about it all, this is your boy Tino signing out.